I was born in 1924 in a place called Tullynakill, which is a very small townland, really, about 2 miles from Cumber in County Down, Northern Ireland. And I was brought up in that area until I was about 5.
I was born in 1920 in Clapton.
My father then changed his job. He got a job in a place called Ballyallerley as the farm or estate manager of a man called Lord Glentoran. And so we moved up to that area.
At the time that we were living, when I was born, my parents were living actually on the borders of Hackney and Clapton. And so my mother chose to go to Clapton. It was the nearest maternity hospital.
We lived there until I was 18, I suppose. Went to school in a place called Moneyray, which again is another village, now an outskirt of Belfast.
My father was very keen to call me Olive Grace because there's a verse in the Psalms, which is a book of the Bible, which says, "Your children shall be as olive branches round your table." So in a great hope that I would be a very submissive, easygoing, peaceful child, was all wrapped up in the name of Olive. And my second name was Grace, which is sort of self-evident. But I don't think my father really reckoned that he would have a child who was so less like a graceful, peaceful little girl. I certainly wasn't that as I grew up. As my mother always said, they had no idea where I came from because I wasn't like anybody else. I had one sister who was 2.5 years older than me, and she was a very docile, quiet little girl. And so I just think I was a bit of a shock, really. So we were true Cockneys, really, because we were born, both of us, within the sound of Bow Bells. I just took to school like duck to water. I loved it. I loved going out to every morning to school. I wasn't one of those children that cried every day. I was itching to go, a bit like Glyn's little Phoebe, really. I was ready for it. I passed a scholarship, and what it did, it gave children like me and like lots of others a chance to glimpse a life which would be quite different from the life that I've been brought up in. I mean, working class family. Went to the grammar school when I was 11 and I stayed until I was nearly 19. And then I left to become a teacher, and then war broke out. The September I was to leave home, and I couldn't wait for it, and I wanted to leave home and go, and then the war broke out, and everything came to a standstill.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland. A state of war, I have to tell you, would exist between us, that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
When I was 14, I left school. Shortly afterwards, I went to the shipyard where I was training in engineering. That was during the war, of course.
Life went on, and through the post I got a letter saying instead of turning up at the training college where I was going to do teaching, I was to report to a school and I was to be evacuated into the wilds of Essex, really. Because although Essex had some important towns on the edge of it. When you got in, it was very, very rural. I'd never been away on my own anywhere before. I was given a band of about, I suppose, 10 children, and they said they're yours. You take those children, you'll be given directions as you go, and then we were given a bag with sandwiches in it and a gas mask in it and something else. Or we were given those, and I took these children, and some were crying, and it was horrific, because when they evacuated the children in England, they did not take them on main lines. They went on the less busy lines, because they kept the main lines open for troops and supplies, and so we were just taken by train. So instead of getting to, now you could drive, I suppose, from London. I have no idea where I stayed, but beyond Epping, out that way.
So I was 15, and I went into the shipyard to train in a branch of engineering. When I was about 18, I felt I should change and prepare for going to India, which I was interested in. So I left the shipyard. That was a special concession, because I was supposed to be doing a job of national importance. I had a big argument with the manager of the firm where I was working, who incidentally was a Christian himself, but he felt I was making a mistake. However, I asked if he would consider letting me go, which he did. And I went into the city hospital and trained there for over 3 years.
I started college in October 1939. War had broken out, and I had been evacuated. I came back and started at college, and I really enjoyed. In those days, teacher training was a 2-year training, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
In those days, when you were training, you worked as well, and you worked a jolly long time. I think I was doing something like 70 hours a week. Now, I would be given time off to attend lectures, that's all, and you fitted in study as and when you could. I remember weekends, for example. I started on a Sunday morning about 7:30 and worked until 9:30 at night with no break except for meals, and that happened every other weekend. So I finished my training, and I enjoyed my training, and afterwards I was asked if I would be prepared to do tutoring. Now, I was the first male nurse who was given that opportunity.
I think you know that I was bombed at college. One of the girls in one of the hostels, all on the same campus, was killed. But I wasn't killed, although the building that I was sleeping in was bombed with a stick of 3 bombs. One hit the principal's house, which is where the girl who died was, part of it was a hostel. I remember waking up and feeling, I don't know what's happened. It was eerily quiet. I do remember that. I got caught. The bomb dropped outside of the building that I was in, and almost outside the room that I was in. So what happened was the building collapsed, and a piece of the outside wall came over like that and made a sort of box, because it was all that, it was all sort of concrete blocks or something. But the funny thing was that when I awoke and realised, I tried to shout, I tried to lift myself up, and I realised I couldn't move. I was somewhere where I couldn't move, and I thought, oh, I've been buried alive. And I was sort of panicked a bit. And then I thought, I started to pray, and I said, I don't understand, I don't know where I am, I don't know what's happened, but I do know that you are here, wherever I am. You have promised not to leave me or forsake me. I must have gone unconscious, I suppose, because I don't remember anything else. The panic went. I remember praying for my parents that they wouldn't be too upset, because I didn't know whether I'd get out or not. And I must have either gone unconscious, or I can't think I would probably have gone to sleep, but I ended up in hospital, but I was all right. No damage, nothing.
So I did tutoring until 1947. The war was over by this time. And then I had decided it was India that God wanted me to go to. So I went to London with two other friends to study in London for another year. We lived in Gray's Inn Road here.
By the time 5 years was up, I had felt that the Lord had said to me, well, you could be of more use in a place like India with teaching. There are plenty of teachers in the UK. So I thought, well, perhaps I should offer to go to India, which I did, and which is where eventually I ended up. So I remember my father saying to me, how much money have you got saved? So I said, about 60, 70 pounds. I suppose that was worth a lot more in those days than it sounds now, but it still wasn't a lot. And he said, well, I think you have to use that to buy your ticket to India. So I booked on a boat, and the booking cost in those days was £65, I think, something like that. And so I paid with that, because I remember my father saying, when you have paid your last penny, then you can expect God to provide for you.
After completing that course, a course in dentistry and midwifery too, as well as homeopathic training, my friends and I left in 1947 to go to India.
I went out believing that I was going in the will of God, and therefore the Lord would provide. And I can honestly say, we never had a lot of money to throw around, but comparatively speaking, we were very much better off, say, than the Indian people were.
I was commended by a church in Cumber, the Brethren Church in Cumber, to go to India. So there was no arrangement in London at all. And they commended me to go to India.
When I went to North India, and I went in January 1947, and Dad came out from Northern Ireland, also from Brethren Assemblies in Northern Ireland, in November 1947. So I went to India just about 9 months before Dad, 10 months.
My friends, Robert Duff and Willie Walker, they were from different churches in Belfast, and they also were commended from their churches to go. And we were, of course, in correspondence with folk in India, so that we had made arrangements to go and join them, and they had assured us of a welcome. That's how we got to India. We travelled on a ship called the Empire Trooper, which was a troop ship, and it was going out to India to fetch the troops home, because India had just become independent. But we called at a large number of ports on our way, stopped at Gibraltar and Malta, Cyprus, travelled down through the Suez Canal, and stopped in Aden, and went to East Africa as well, and then Karachi. Altogether it took us 4 weeks, that journey. So it was a very interesting journey, and of course it was my first time really to have travelled abroad, and the others as well. So we got to know quite a lot of places that we never even imagined we would ever visit. We arrived in Bombay and then travelled overland from Bombay to Calcutta, and one of the folk whom we knew, who had gone out already to India from our area, he came down to Calcutta and met us and took us up to Bihar, where we were going to live. In those days, of course, the British had just left, so everything was very much as the British had left it. So that's how we got to India. Quite an adventure, I can assure you.
When I got to India, I went to live with an older couple, and they were working. They had a clinic and an orphanage and a school, and on this one compound. And I went to them, and my main idea was to teach in the school.
So you were treated with considerable courtesy, and you travelled first class on the train, and we had waiters who came with their pugrees, their headgear and their bundas, and wore white gloves, all very different from what you would get now in India, even if you were travelling first class. And it was really exciting.
The first year, I went up to language school where we were taught Hindi or Bengali, which is the language I learned, and we went there for about 4 months. The couple with whom I was living, very excited. They said, "Do you know, we've had a letter from Ireland to say that 3 young men are coming out from Ireland, and one is going to be stationed at Kalmatar, because there was already an Irishman there, and the other 2 are going to Jamtara, and they'll be in time for the November conference."
I was 23 at the time.
One of the girls from Jamtara, who was a nurse, and the couple I was living with, and they said, we'll all go out to Sagjura and let Alex see what it's like. And if he likes it, he can go there. So then I just got to know him then, really, that was all. And I mean, it was only just over a sort of a long weekend, really.
Met Mum in 1947, the end of the year, and we became friendly in 1948.
But after we got home, he sent me a letter and said that he was very interested to meet me, and you know, he wondered whether I would have had any idea of, say, joining up with him. It was a bit in a hurry, wasn't it, really? So I didn't answer straight away because I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I hardly knew from Adam, and I'd always said, I will never marry anybody from the Brethren, especially if he was going to be like my father, you know, because he was so strict. And I knew that Northern Ireland, they were strict there. So, anyway, eventually I wrote back and said, well, I would pray about it, and I would consider it. Dad came and he said, if you would like, now this is the dramatic thing, isn't it? If you would like to join me in Delhi, would you come and see me off at Jamtara station? And he would take that as meaning that I eventually would go to Delhi and I would marry him and we would do future Christian work together. So, because I hadn't made up my mind, I didn't really want to tell the senior couple that I was living with. So Dad said, I'll come over on my bicycle and I'll wait outside the gate of the mission compound. My train leaves at whatever time, and so I suggest we leave Mahijam, which is where I was, in order to get back in time for me to catch the train. When I got to the gate, Dad was there waiting, and the couple that I had gone out to live with and to work with, I didn't tell them where I was going, so they didn't know. So off I go. And they'd gone into Asansol to do the monthly shop or whatever, and therefore they weren't there. And so I met Dad, and I had that journey with Dad on our bikes. And Dad asked me then if I would be prepared to go. And you see, it's a bit of a shot in the dark, isn't it? Because I didn't really know anything about him at all. I don't even, you know, I mean, he was much younger than I was, and I thought, I don't know whether that would be a good idea or not. And then I thought, well, what are the alternatives, you know? To work here in India all on my own, and I know lots of single lady missionaries who have done it, and some have weathered it well and some haven't. And I thought, do I really want to turn out like that, you know? So in the end, I looked at the pluses and I looked at the minuses and decided, well, I would go for it. When we got to the station, a train came in. Robert Duff was there with all the luggage. Robert was in on this, knew that Dad had come to meet me on the bikes and we were going to go straight to the station. So Robert had taken all the luggage for Dad and for Robert. And Dad said, well, what I suggest is that if you come up to language school, because then I had to change to Hindi, because in Delhi it's Hindi, not Bengali. Though in the area I was living in it was Bengali. So Dad said, well, I'm going up to Hindi language school in May. I think it was May. And if you are definitely committed, I'll meet you at the language school. So, and then he kissed me, to my horror.
Yes. She was 3.5 years older than I am. But that didn't seem to be a problem.
Oh, what is that? So I was so amazed. I didn't know what to do. I thought, wow, Dad didn't worry Dad anyway. He just went ahead. So I think everybody was sort of gobsmacked, you know. So when I got back, the Bush Telegraph had been working overtime. When I got back, the cycled back from the station to Mahijam. The Kansicks were having afternoon tea on the veranda. And she sat down, cup of tea, yes, thank you, and so on. And then she said, so, where have you been today? So I said, well, I went to see the two Irishmen off to Delhi. They decided not to stay here. They don't want to work in village India. They would much rather work in Delhi. So she said, so why? What was Alex Smith doing at the gate? So I said, well, I think he was waiting for me. She said, well, do you know him? So I said, well, not really, no. She said, she was so cross because they had got all this planned for Alex, and they had a lot to learn about Alex because you could never tell him what to do, could you? So she said, I don't suppose you even know what colour eyes he's got, do you? I said, no, I'm afraid I don't. She was horrified. And you've committed yourself to go to Delhi? You don't know anybody in Delhi? You don't even know this young man? Do you know Robert Duff? I said, no. She was very, very put out. In the end, it settled down, and I went up to Delhi and met Dad, and we spent the next 3 months at Bible college, or at language school, really. And I got to know him.
So we went up to a place called Landar and did language study there in Hindi. And I enjoyed my language study. There were 3 grades that you could do, and I did all 3 of them. I also was interested in Urdu, so I did 2 exams in Urdu as well.
So I was 26 when my father said this to me. Don't suppose you'll be getting married now, so I'll give you £100. So he did. Then I met Dad. Then I wrote home, said I'd met Dad, and we would like to get married very much. And he said, well, you've already had your money, really. But he sent me another 50, which I think was quite a lot of money in those days. And so that was, more or less, that's what I left Mahijam with. Didn't have, a lot of spare cash, but that's what I left with.
And we decided that we would get engaged at the beginning of the year, which was pretty quick.
When I first went, the first year I'd been up in language school, Dad said he wasn't sure, whether he could afford an engagement ring. So I said, well, it's all right, I don't need one.
We were married in 1948, at the end, towards the end of the year, 3rd of November, 48. The missionaries that we went out to weren't at all pleased because we moved from that area in Bihar. They had a job all lined up for me in a place where they would like me to go to, called Sagjuria. But I didn't feel that I wanted to get involved in what had been, yes, an interesting work, but it had been going on for 50 years by this time, and nothing seems to be moving, and we wanted to get into the city, so that's how we came to Delhi, and worked with this chap called Alan Mackenzie. Our first baby was born in 1949 up in Missouri in the Landauer Hospital.
And I was born in 1920, so by this time I'm 29.
And we came back down to Delhi, and when we came back, we were living in a place called Derrygunge. We had this flat, and then we were put out of the flat because we found it was a subletting. And when the owner wanted it for somebody else, he informed the man from whom we were renting it that he wanted this flat back again. So some Indian Christian folk said we could go and live with them. We had a baby, and we lived with them. This man, Pritchard, Laddie Pritchard, his name was, he was actually Indian, Anglo-Indian.
We went there, I think, soon after we were married, and we had Ashley certainly when we went back to Delhi. We had him there, and we enjoyed our time there.
After completing the second year at language school, we came back and moved to Delhi, from Delhi to Benares. There was no mission, but there were missionaries with whom we were working.
And when I think about it, and I think of, you know, where we lived and the conditions in which we lived, you know, all the time we were there, we weren't sick, nor was Ashley sick. You know, it's wonderful. I mean, we must have been surrounded by all sorts. I mean, even the flat itself had a big grease mark round it because the people all sat on the floor, didn't they? And where they greased their hairs, you know. So you get a big grease mark round the walls. And however hard you try to cover it with emulsion, the emulsion doesn't take on that. So it's always there. And yet we were not sick. We were not sick.
In 52, we had lost Headley. I was down in Delhi, and Mum was up in the hills with this Mrs. Mackenzie, Mildred, and while I was there, this baby of ours, Headley, had died, cot death.
And that was very traumatic for us because we were on our own, and by this time we had decided to move from Delhi to Calcutta, to Benares. And it was while we were there, it was actually up on the hills. We had gone up to join friends at a place called Rani Khet, which was also in the Himalayas, and it was a place that people went to escape the heat of Delhi. We went up there and we lost the little boy.
And so I had to come back and arrange for the burial, and that was quite traumatic, as you can imagine.
I always remember when Dad took the baby for burial, and he looked such a lonely figure. He was sitting up there in Rani Khet. There were no cars. It was the place was, the streets were too poor to, I expect there were one or two cars, but not many. And Dad ordered a horse-drawn gharry or cart, and he sat on it with the little coffin on his knees. And one of our friends went with him. And he looked so sad just to saw him, and he didn't want me to go to the cemetery with him. he said he would just go, and he went with this other man, and they buried him.
However, after going back to Delhi, we decided to go to Benares to complete our studies, to get to know Hinduism a bit more, because it's a center of Hinduism. I was doing third year Hindi studies at that time, and I had to read several Hindu books in Hindi, the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita, and I did all of these in Hindi. I had a Hindi pundit who spoke no English at all, so when he and I had daily sessions, I was completing my Hindi studies. And we also had a shop where we sold Christian literature, and we had meetings down there in that shop as well.
And I do remember that somebody once, some short time after, I received quite a generous gift from a friend, and she said, "I'm just giving you this for you to use on yourself. There may be something special that you want to do with this. I don't know, but anyway, it's for you. You can use it in outreach, gospel work if you wish. But if there's something special that you would like, then I'd be very happy for you to use it." And Dad said to me, "What would you like to do with this money?" And I said, "Well, I would really like to put a headstone up for Headley, who was our second son." And I could see that Dad did not approve. And he said to me, "Well, it's like this." He said, "You are here this year. You're not likely ever to come up here again. And you're using this money to put a headstone up, and you don't believe that the baby is there. You believe the baby is with the Lord in heaven. And why do you want to put a headstone up then?" He said, "I'd rather you bought something either for yourself or we just used it in everyday living." And I said, "No, there's nothing I want for myself." And so the stone has never been put up, and it's always at the back of my mind that in some very remote part of the Himalayas is the body of that little boy. And I would have liked just to record that this little chap had been there. But then I did realise the weight of Dad's, it was really putting your faith to the test, really. That he said, if you believe that the baby is with the Lord in heaven, then why don't you act on what you believe? And I did realise that, so we left it.
And we were in Benares then until we came home on furlough. So we came home in 1952, back to Ireland, and Murray was born in that year. He is the only one of the family. His teacher once asked him, his music teacher in Uti, what nationality are you, Murray? And he said, "Oh, I'm Irish," he said. "And what about your brothers?" "I don't know what they are." So Murray was born in Ireland, and is very, I think, still very proud of the fact that he was born in Ireland.
And after that, the children came leaping and jumping and fighting and pushing and all the rest that little boys do, one after the other, roughly every year and a half. And we looked on all of them as God's gift to us. We enjoyed them, and they were hard going at many, many times.
While we were at home in 1952, we had a letter from some folk in Bath, Mr. and Mrs. Kanzik. That was the couple to whom Mum went originally, were both in very poor health and needed a furlough. And would I consider going back to Mahijam, or would we consider going back to that area for 1 year, which we did. We felt it was right to do that. So we went back to Mahijam for 12 months. And during that time, Campbell was born. During that year, in Bihar, this place Mahijam in Bihar, they spoke Bengali. So I learned Bengali, and during the very hot season we went up to Darjeeling, and I went to the language school in Darjeeling, and so learned sufficient Bengali to get around with. When we had finished that year, it was we felt that perhaps maybe wasn't the best thing for us to go back to Benares, so we went to further east to Calcutta. Now, at this time, Mum had decided that she wasn't very well. One of her legs was swelling, and we couldn't find out what was wrong. She was running a fever. And eventually it was discovered that she had filariasis. It was only then that was decided that Mum ought to go to this specialist hospital in Calcutta and have treatment. So she went and had treatment, which didn't do much good. And the specialist there in Calcutta decided that we ought to go back to England. So instead of going back to England, we decided we would look for a place which had an English type climate, and where there were no malarial or filarial mosquitoes. And there were one or two places we could have gone up to Darjeeling from Calcutta, or we could have gone down to the Nilgiris in the south. We had at that time no missionaries in Darjeeling, but we did have some missionaries in the south, in Darjeeling, or in the Nilgiris. So I wrote to them and said that this was the position where we were ordered back to England. We didn't feel that this was what we wanted to do. Would there be a work for us in the Nilgiris? And they assured us there would be. So that's how we came to be in Uti. So we left. We had 3 children, Ashley and Murray and Campbell. And after getting to the Nilgiris, Trevor was born. We got a house in Uti, and we got to know the school. The first job was to get to know people. The Goulds were living in Uti at the time, and Len Gould was a Bible teacher, and he did quite a lot of traveling around. I think we got to Uti about October, and I found by Christmas time that I was being away from home quite a number of nights and sometimes weeks in different parts of South India. And then we got to know the schools, and the Lushington, which was a boys' boarding at that time. So naturally, being there, we were asked if we could help, and Mum started teaching in Breek School, and I started helping in the Lushington boys' boarding. So Mr. and Mrs. Willey he was the principal of the school, Breek School, and he was also the superintendent of the boarding. It was time for him to take a furlough, and we were invited to go to live in Lushington, give up our rented house, and go and live in Lushington and care for the boarding, and also look after his mother, who was a very old lady and confined to bed. So we did this, went up to Lushington, lived in what was the Willys flat, cared for his mother, and also had our boys going to the school, those who were school age. I think at that time only two, Ashley and Murray. Trevor was born 56, and we didn't go up to to Lushington until 57, I think. You were born in Lushington itself. This, I think, was the first time that this had ever happened. That a baby had been born right there. The mum hadn't gone to hospital. She could have gone to Kotagiri, which she did later for Wesley. But your birth was uncomplicated, and one morning the boys went off to school. When they came back, you were there. You were quite small anyhow when we brought you back to the UK. And we got a house which was used for missionaries in a place called Wellesley Avenue in Belfast. And that's where you had your first Irish experience.
And as I look back on our Indian days and realise that all the fun we had and all the fights we had, but you know, and now I look back on it and I'm glad that we took that route and had such a large family.
Gentlemen, it has been a privilege playing with you tonight.